Well, howdy, folks. Welcome back to another crackin' episode of Studio L7. As always, I'm your host, Bigbobby, the one-man band. Cue the applause, please. Now, before we roll up our sleeves, I just want to put out there that if you hear any strange sounds during today's episode, it's probably just my stomach. I made the questionable choice of having leftover tacos for breakfast, and well, you don't need the graphic details, but pray for me. All right, today we're diving into the creative and often confusing world of podcast scripting. That's right, we're talking about the importance of scripting, or at least bullet pointing your podcast. And I know what some of you are thinking, but Bigbobby, I'm a natural, I can just wing it, baby. But hold on to your SD cards, folks, because by the end of this chat, you might just change your tune. Let's kick things off by imagining a scenario. Picture this. You're telling a friend about your recent wild adventure in the Serengeti photographing wildlife. You're all excited and flustered, and the words just tumble out. 1 minute you're talking about the lions, next about the sketchy airline food, then you backtrack to the surprisingly decent airplane bathroom. Who even knew they could be clean? The story is all over the place, and your friend's eyes start to glaze over. That, my friends, is the freestyle method at its worst. You're enthusiastic, sure, but without a plan, your listeners might be left scratching their heads, wondering if they accidentally stumbled onto a podcast about airplane lavatory critiques. Now imagine the same story, but with a clear direction. You outline your journey, starting with the flight, the wacky food experience, and then the breathtaking sight of the lions. It flows, it has direction, and most importantly, it keeps your friend engaged. That's the power of scripting, my friends. Let's say you're a die-hard freestyler and you're still not convinced. You're thinking, but Bigbobby, I love the thrill, the spontaneity, the dance on the razor's edge of disaster. Well, to you, I say, consider bullet points. It's like freestyling with a safety net. You see, bullet points are your lighthouse in the foggy sea of conversation. You could be knee-deep in a tale about that time you had a face-off with a grumpy squirrel during a field recording, and just as you're about to veer off into the ethics of squirrel model consent, you can glance at your bullet points and get back on track. Now, there are some folks who will argue that scripting leads to a robotic delivery, and to that I say, only if you let it. The trick isn't to read verbatim like you're announcing the evening news. Although, let's face it, we'd all enjoy the news more if it was about the latest camera releases and not, well, the news. No, my friends, the trick is to use the script as a guide, not a chain. Let it map your route, but don't be afraid to take scenic detours. Make it your own. To put it in photography terms, think of your script as the frame, while the picture inside is your delivery, your personality, your wit, your charm. You can change the picture as much as you like, but that frame gives it structure, purpose. Let's also not forget the boon of scripting when it comes to post-production. Editing can be a pain, especially if you've spent half the podcast talking about the existential crisis of a grasshopper that photobombed your shoot. Scripting can save you from the tedium of snipping out irrelevant tangents. So, dear listeners, to script or to freestyle? That's the million-dollar question. If you ask me, it's all about balance. A dash of planning, a sprinkle of spontaneity, and a whole lot of passion. That's the recipe for a great podcast, at least in my books. Oh, and one more thing. If you're ever debating whether to have leftover tacos for breakfast, just remember my sage advice. Don't. Thanks for tuning into another episode of Studio L7, folks. Keep those shutters clicking, those recorders rolling, and those scripts scripting. This is Bigbobby signing off until next time.